Hello guys, welcome back to this channel. Today we're going to rank all episodes of Supergirl Season 3. Not much else to say, but we can get started. But go check my Arrowverse playlist and also my episode ranking playlist. And let's get started. And also go check out my Supergirl Season 3 review. Okay, so for today's Falcon crew, we got The Force Awakens. There's Ray and Han in there. Hold on, I'm going to turn my light so you can see them better. There they are, in there. And then in here, we have, you can open all of these. I'll be doing a Falcon review live in a live stream. Not soon, really. Hold on. There's Chewie laying on the bed. Okay, that plate broke. I can fix that. And just did. So, and then in here, nothing. And then I don't know where BB-8, oh, I never put BB-8 in there. Here. We can have BB-8 just like right here as Finn, as Chewie. You might not be able, there he is. As he scares him off. And I dropped the figure. I'll pick that up in a minute. There's Finn using the bottom cannon right here. And yeah, that's this week's Falcon crew. Close all the flaps. Number 23 of episode 14, Shot Through the Heart. I'm going to give this one maybe like a 4.9 out of 10. I can maybe look at whatever I have all the other episodes as. I'm not sure. I can take a look later, but whatever. I don't like this episode at all, and I think it's terrible. Not as bad as Childish Things and Mr. and Mrs. Mrs. Piddlewick from season 2, and then Childish Things is from season 1. Not as bad as those episodes, but I still think it's pretty bad. Seeing Wynn's mom is pretty good, I guess, but the villain of this episode is terrible, and I think this episode is terrible. Then you have episode 2, Triggers, at number 22. This episode is pretty boring. Literally, like, there's a scene where, like, Kara's having flashbacks of her in the pod. It looks like a first-person shooter PlayStation 2 game. It looks terrible. And I'm gonna be honest, it does look like a first-person shooter game. I don't think this episode's good. The villain, I think this episode has improved a little bit because of episode 11, the way they kind of went with the villain. And that's the only reason why it's not 23, because of episode 11. But anyway, I don't like this episode. The action's bad. The stuff with Monel is pretty bad. And because of this episode, she had to get over with Monel. Which, in ways, that's a good thing, but still, bad episode. Number 21, episode 21, Not Kansas. This is probably the hardest one to place of all the bottom ones. And on one hand, I kind of do like the Kara on Krypton side of things, but then you have the whole thing with the Gun Patrol. It really doesn't work to me. Like, I think it's better than a few of the other episodes. I don't think it's as bad as people say it is, because like the Gun Patrol aspect to it is interesting for Supergirl to tackle, but why would you tackle that on Supergirl? Like, especially in this season, and at this late in the season. Like, maybe this could have been one of the earlier episodes of this season. Maybe you could have taken this out for maybe episode 5 could have done something with this, or maybe making this an earlier episode, because it doesn't work with where it's placed. Maybe episode 6 or something like that. Maybe during the Midvale storyline. So maybe this could have been episode 6 or 7 while they're in Midvale. There's this Gun Patrol problem. I would have loved that, honestly. That could have been interesting. Maybe I wouldn't have loved that. I think that could have been interesting, but still, not a fan. Now you have episode 19, The Fantical, at number 20, kicking out the top 20. My problem with this one, it's just dull. I'll leave it at that. It kind of follows the followers of Rao, which is a very weird storyline used throughout the season. It kind of works with the whole rain thing, but after episode 10, it just gets lost for a while, and then they bring it back up here, and it's just frustrating. Like, I just don't think this episode's very watchable. It's kind of dull. The Guardian storyline, it's okay. I think it's fine. But other than that, this episode doesn't have much going for it. And I think it's kind of dull. Number 19, you have episode 5, Damage. I feel like, honestly, I'm not a fan of what's going on with the filters. Okay, that's better. I'm not a fan of the whole Morgan Edge storyline of the season. It just does not work at all. And, I mean, especially in this episode, and I think one of the other episodes, maybe, I think it might have been episode 1 or episode 3, or I don't remember. But you kind of see the Morgan Edge storyline quite a bit around this season, and it does not work at all. Especially, like, it gets better throughout the season. Like, when you get to episode 12, it's actually not bad. But here, it really does not work. It's just dull. And that's how I feel about this episode. Although, the lead storyline, kind of interesting. And I think the political thriller aspect, whenever they do, is not good. Because whenever they do these things on Supergirl, thank God season 1 did not do these. And then season 2 just started doing them. And it just doesn't work to me. And I wish if they did a bit more, like, smart, because it's kind of obvious that he did it, especially, like, because he's I guess maybe cowardly about the way he's going with it. It just doesn't work, and eventually he just steps in the villain role. He kind of works in ways as, like, a kind of foil to Lena Luthor, but they just go too far with it, and it just doesn't work. And I kind of blame this episode for it. Number 18, episode 23, Battles Lost in 1. This is probably the most dull and like, most, like, episode where I'm like, okay, whatever. More than any of them, I'm going to be honest. So, I don't really care for this episode. The final fight is pretty good. It's not great, it's just good. Anyway, so I think this episode's fine. Like, I think there's way too many revelations by the end. Like, they literally defeated Rain only, like, a little bit more than, like, halfway through the episode, which is really weird. I'm gonna be honest, that's just really weird. And not a fan of this episode, but it's okay. But it's just another season finale. Next up at number 17, you have episode 12, For Good. I feel like I've kind of hated on this episode a little bit in my review, but it's okay. Like, the Lily and Luthor storyline just should not have been there. But the whole Morgan Edge storyline was a bit better in this episode than it was in episode 5. So, like, the Lily and Luthor storyline just should not have been there. But the whole Morgan Edge storyline was a bit better in this episode than it was in episode 5. So, I guess that worked. But still, not a very good episode. It's just kind of there. But it still kind of works for me, and I still enjoy it. Next up at number 16, we have episode 6, Midvale. This is probably the episode where I'm just like, you have a lot of potential in there, but it's just a waste of potential for the most part. The thing I don't like about this episode at all is just the way the acting is not very good. The storyline is fine. Like, I kind of like the idea of doing, like, a whole, like, storyline about Kara back when she was in, like, high school. It kind of works for the episode and what what Alex has been going through. And it's kind of a little interesting to see this, but the execution just is not there. The actors and actresses are fine for the most part, but it kind of just goes for the teenage, like, angst so much. Like, it kind of feels like a little, like, I guess, precursor to Superman and Lois and what they do. I feel like some part of Superman and Lois is kind of based off of this episode, and so, at least so far, and I can already tell that is way better than this. So, this episode is okay. Number 15, episode 1, Girl of Steel. I think she's made of steel, to be honest. I think this one's kind of interesting. The scene where Carl lifts the submarine is cool. You kind of get introduced to the tone of the season, but this is probably the most, of all the episodes, like, this, all the episodes that I think are around, like, this part, this is probably the most forgettable episode of the season. The villains on the submarine, I just don't really remember them, and I just think, like they're just not memorable. With the exception of the scene with Kara lifting the submarine and the whole thing with Samantha Arias. Besides that, this episode didn't really do anything for me. But it's not bad. It's just kind of mediocre. And I think it's fine. At number 14, we have episode 4, The Faithful. I'm going to be honest. Like, I think this a beginning part of the season, this is one of the better episodes of the beginning. The second best one, actually. And it's kind of an interesting storyline, kind of spread out the season. But, I mean, but I think it works at the beginning of the season, like episode 4, and then into episode 10, it kind of works. But then once you get to episode, whenever, like, he kind of invites the Dark Kryptonians back down to Earth, I think it was, like, episode 20, I think he did that, or episode 21. This episode, the whole storyline of this episode, it just falls apart. Like, it starts out pretty good here, but then it just falls apart. Number 13, we have episode 22, Make It Rain. I think this episode, it kind of feels like kind of one of those, I don't know what other, like, penultimate episodes. I think of the problem with the Supergirl finales and penultimate episodes and their kind of relationship between each other. I feel like the penultimate episodes always kind of outdo the finale. I think this is the weakest of any of the penultimate episodes so far on Supergirl. And I think it's pretty good. This is the one we're getting to kind of the good episodes of the season. And I think it's actually not bad. But my problems here, it's just like, really, like, I mean, it's the Dark Kryptonians that kind of ruined the season. And then the Marin sacrifice was pretty good, actually. Kind of emotional. And what they do with Rain, I wish Rain was still in, like, Samantha Aries' body. I wish they just did that. But seeing Kara's mother on Earth is kind of cool. And, yeah. I do like this episode. Number 12, we have episode 3, Far From the Tree. I think this episode's kind of like episode 12 of Arrow Season 5, Bravo, where, like, you kind of see the whole Supergirl and Martian. There's another episode like that. I'll talk about that later. But, like, I really do like this episode, to be honest, and I think it's pretty interesting. Seeing Kara go to Mars is kind of fun. And it works. It's easily the best at the beginning of the season. But another one, I think it's kind of forgettable. But I think it's a good episode. Number 11, we have episode 15, In Search of Lost Time. I thought this episode was actually pretty good. I mean, the thing is, I'm not a fan of this episode. Like, the whole cape training thing, no, just doesn't really work. But the storyline with Rain and Lena really does work for me. And I thought that was really interesting. So I think this episode's pretty good, but not great. Kicking out the top 10, we have episode 13, Both Sides Now. This is probably the hardest one to place because on one hand, I kind of do like the Purity storyline, but on paper it really works. But when you put it in the season, well, at least the season it works. But in the episode, I thought the episode was alright. And the things I like about this episode are kind of like the whole psychological kind of thriller aspect to it. But a lot of these stuff involving Purity, I don't know, it doesn't 100% work. But I still do like this episode quite a bit. And I mean, it works in the season quite well. I think it's placed perfectly. And seeing kind of Purity kind of join in. And then I wish Pestilence episode was a little earlier. Maybe swap episode 4. Maybe like you push episode 14, maybe the 16, and then 16, 15, move back spot. I don't know, whatever. But overall, I do like this episode quite a bit, and it does work for me. Number 9, we have episode 7, Wake Up. Kind of like episode 4. I think this one, honestly, I feel like, I think at first I wasn't a fan of it. I mean, I like the Rain storyline. There's kind of two sides. You have the whole thing with Monel, Kara. I don't know what it is. It just doesn't really quite work for me. But I think as the season goes on, and especially once you get to episode 10, it kind of improves that storyline for some reason. And then you have the Rain storyline and that kind of side of things. That actually really works for me, to be honest. And I really like all that stuff. But not an episode where I'm like, yes, all this stuff, I love it. I think it's just alright. Number 8, we have episode 10, The Legion of Superheroes. This is where you get introduced to Emra and Brainy. The fight between them and Rain is pretty good, actually. The prison raid is a pretty cool scene. The stuff with the Rao guy is cool. The Kara in the mind is interesting, but not much that it's great. Like, I feel like Supergirl does these kind of things where it's always an easy way out, really, for the most part. And then they have all these clues, and eventually one of the clues you just searched up for all these clues, and then one of them eventually gets them out. And they did this in season 1, in that episode where Kara's just like at the Kryptonian thing, and then this season it's a little better in this season, but still I don't think it really works. But I mean, this episode's still pretty good. I still like this episode. Number 7 is episode 16, Of Two Minds. This is where we start to get into the great episodes, to be honest. I think Of Two Minds is really interesting. The Pestilence storyline was okay. I thought, but the thing that hurts this episode just a bit is the Kara kind of reacting to what Emerald wants to do. No, why? Come on. Like, you can't just, I mean, to be honest, like, I mean, I understand what she's coming from, but really, like, I mean, I understand where Emma's coming from even more. Like, I feel like saving a time period is more important than not killing someone. That just hurts this episode so much. That whole argument is just terrible. I really don't like that at all. Other than that, everything else in the episode is great. The Pestilence fight is pretty good for the most part. I think the mystery in who is Pestilence actually works, honestly. But other than that, this episode doesn't have much to offer. But it doesn't have to. Number 6 is episode 18, Shelter from the Storm. This is the episode where you see Rain kind of invade the whole Luthor house, mansion, whatever you call it. But anyway, it's not the Luthor gun thing, I don't know. But anyway, this episode is still pretty good. This episode is great. I really do like the Rain reveal. Like, in those scenes where she's in like the whole captivity thing, she looks really weird without the mask. Nowhere near as creepy for some reason. And the fight between her and Alex is pretty good. You have a fight with her and Supergirl a little bit later. That's also pretty good too. This episode has a lot of good things going for it, but I don't think it's going to be any higher in my list. Number 5 is episode 11, Fort Roz. Despite how much I did not like Livewire in season 1 and the other girl from earlier in the season, I really enjoyed this episode. I think them going to Fort Roz is a ton of fun, and I think seeing this kind of brought the Arrow season 5 stuff. By the way, this is the episode that kind of feels like that episode. It really works for me, even better than episode 3, to be honest. And Livewire is actually very fun in this episode. Her sacrifice, nothing emotional, but it really works for me, and it's pretty satisfying, to be honest. And then the whole thing with what's her name? I can't remember. I can't remember, whatever the girl from from episode 2 is. I can't remember her name, but whatever. I think she's much better in this episode than she was in episode 2. She kind of works as like a fun anti-hero, and this episode works for me, but it's not number 1 because, again, I'm not a fan of Livewire and whatchamacallit, and the other girl as villains. And on the Rain fight is pretty good too. Number 4 is episode 17, Trinity. I think this episode this is the only episode where you really got to see the 3 world killers together. And the final fight with Pestilence and Purity actually really works for me. And then you have Ring absorbing their powers, which, why didn't they just assume that? It's kind of obvious that she already did. So, I know that's kind of weird. But, I mean, I don't really remember anything else that happened this episode besides the Rain stuff. You have the stuff where they go into Samantha Aries' mind, which is kind of cool. A little weird, but it kind of works for me. And I do enjoy that. Number 3, you have episode 20, Dark Side of the Moon. This is where I was expecting the season to fall apart. But honestly, I really enjoyed this episode, where they went to Krypton or Argo City to get the Haranel. I really do like this episode, to be honest. And I loved all that stuff where they go to Krypton. Really great. You don't really see much of the DEO storyline, which Supergirl, I feel like, this is another example of Supergirl where they kind of just can't stick to one storyline. Like Arrow Season 5 with Capuchan, also with Present and Odyssey. They did this thing like where they just kept on like one storyline, flashbacks. You have Oliver kind of in the hospital with flashbacks. Later in season 2, you got Oliver and Slade, flashbacks. Season 5, Adrian torturing Oliver, flashbacks. Here, you have just them switching between the 2 main storylines. And I wish they just focused on one. I would prefer the Krypton one, obviously. But it does kind of create for a little satisfying conclusion. My runner-up is episode 9, Rain. I really do like this mid-season finale. Not the best one. I still think there's some better ones out there. Like, I think, like, really most of the era ones. The Climb, Year's End, Running to Stand Still, Me Out the Yellow Suit, What We Leave Behind, Three Ghosts, Presents. I'm just rattling them off. I think a lot of those are just a little bit better, but this is still a good one, mostly because of the fight. A lot of the Rain kind of psychological thriller stuff with the world killers actually really works for me, especially in this episode, as well as episode 13. But even better here, the Rain stuff is great. This is probably her at her scariest, where she kind of feels like the Zoom of Supergirl at her most here, and I really liked all of that stuff, to be honest. And I thought this was a great episode. But number 1, I think this is the best episode of the season, and probably the best episode of Supergirl so far, outside of crossover episodes. I'm sorry to do this, but number 1 is Crisis on Earth X Part 1. I think this is easily my favorite episode of the season. I know it's a crossover episode. I'm sorry, guys. But the thing I love about this episode, you kind of see the whole team kind of coming together into this crossover. But I think the way they came together is also great. Where you have Barry's wedding, they went to Barry's wedding, which is great, honestly. And I really do like all of that stuff, and that's the stuff I love. And then the fight with the Earth X people, or should I say Nazis, really works for me. I really liked all of that stuff. Not much else to say because I'll talk about the crossover when I rank the crossover. So I'm trying to keep the crossover episodes a little low for now, but I really do like this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and comment down below. And I'll see you guys next time. Adios.